Hello friends, this is Cara-Renee with B.Reborn Art and Healing. Today I'm creating on an 8x10 gallery depth wood panel. These are some of the supplies that I did pull out to use. I did not end up using all of them. I used this stencil. I did not end up using that one, and I did use this one. The rice paper is just absolutely gorgeous. It is from, it's washi paper by Paper Designs, and I got it through an Etsy shop online. I'm going to go ahead and apply that rice paper with matte medium, and I'm being careful to give it a really good coat, as I don't want any dry spots underneath the rice paper because that will create bubbles. And then I'm going to go ahead and place that rice paper on the surface. I did cut it down because I wrongly assumed that it was smaller than an 8x10, but it ended up that I cut off parts that I didn't really need to, but in the end, it all worked out. I'm going to be using this chipboard quote that says, "Dance to the beat of your dreams," from Creative Embellishments. I get all of my chipboard there. They've got beautiful designs, and then I'll be using that Tim Holtz metal butterfly as well. I will be heat embossing the color onto these pieces, as I have found that that's the easiest way to get the color on without getting super messy. I am going to go ahead and give all three of these pieces a coat of gesso. Actually, I gave it more than one coat. I just continued to apply it until I felt like I had a really good coverage. And I don't show all of those layers, but I do give it 2 or 3 coats, I believe. And then I'm going to come in with this golden fluid acrylic in ultramarine violet. And again, here I do give it many coats, and I don't show all of that, but I do give it a really thorough coating of that paint. At first, I thought that I would just leave it painted, but the purple that I ended up with was just way too bold for the piece. I just felt like I needed things to be a little bit more muted. And in the end, you'll find out that I didn't really win that battle, because I did end up landing right back here in this bright purple when I used some Art Alchemy waxes. I used the electric violet, and it is super bold. But again, the process is one that you just have to kind of go with and just continue to tweak things until you like them. It can be a little bit frustrating, and it can be a little bit chaotic. For me, it was a little chaotic because I was filming as well, but I was able to cut out a lot of unnecessary bits while still showing you how I corrected things that I didn't like. So I am going to go ahead, as I showed you there, I'm going to go ahead and add some of that paint to the edges of the chipboard, as I don't want any of that white to show through where the gesso was remaining. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my Art Alchemy waxes. The first one that I'm using here is Vintage Silk, because again, I felt like those pieces were just too bold of a purple. They were definitely electric, even though I had not yet even tried that wax. But here is the chaotic part of the video, where I'm just kind of doing a dance back and forth using different waxes. This one is Royal Robes. It's kind of a pinkish tone on this on this layer. And then you're going to see that I wasn't really placing that quote in the right order. And you'll see me correct that as well. I decided that I wanted to provide a coat of Concord, Dusty Concord Distress ink, which can be used for embossing. And so I went ahead and gave a coating of that to the sentiment as well as the butterfly. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply some clear embossing powder to all 3 of those pieces, and then I will heat set it. Again, it's a super great way to get some color on that chipboard with a little bit less frustration, even though this project was a little frustrating for me overall. And then the butterfly, because it was metal and the other parts were chipboard, the color that I ended up with was not the same on on both pieces. And so I did do some fussing with that as well, as you'll be able to see here as we move along. I am showing the drying time here just because I want you to see that heat embossing is really quite quick. The heat gun melts that plastic, that embossing powder pretty quickly. And then the butterfly, because again, it still was too vibrant in comparison to the sentiment, I went ahead and applied a layer of black archival ink and clear embossing powder and embossed that again. And that muted down that really, really bright purple. So I liked that much better. But again, this process was very much a create and fix kind of thing. But, you know, sometimes that's the way it goes. Things don't always turn out the way that we have in our head. And so it's okay to fuss around. It's okay to try new things. It's okay to cover over something that you don't like to get the result that you really wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and use this Concord, Dusty Concord to do some stenciling on my project. And you'll see as we move through this process that there was a big oops there as well, but I will let that unfold as we continue. So, and there I was just trying to wipe off as much of that black archival ink off of the makeup brush so that I didn't get a really dirty color there. It did end up having some residue, so the Dusty Concord wasn't as true to its color as it would have been, you know, if I was using a clean brush or a clean sponge. But again, in the end, it worked out, and I end up coming back over some of that anyway as we move along. The makeup brushes are just thrilling to work with because they're not wet. The ink it's an ink, so it doesn't run and seep under the stencil, which is really awesome. And here I'm coming in with some black archival ink and just adding some black accents with that stencil. This is one of my favorite stencils. It's the Paris stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. And I just love all the small elements. It's got a little bit of script, a little strip of script there, which I really like. And I love the postage circle there as well. I don't really use the Eiffel Tower because it's awfully small, but I really like the stencil. It's one of my favorites. And then here I'm just grabbing that little 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the number 1. I really like the look of that. So again, with the black archival ink, I'm applying that. And then a little bit here on the bottom in the black, the archival black ink from Ranger. I wanted a little bit of accent on the bottom of the piece just to kind of tie in that stamping throughout the whole piece. Oh, and I did forget, you can see that I did use that lace stencil there on the corners, the lower right and the lower left-hand corners. But in the end, you're going to see that they disappear. And this is the point where all of the stamping that I did with the Dusty Concord ink did disappear because Distress ink is water soluble. And so when I pulled back this burnt umber light glaze, it pulled up all that Dusty Concord, that really kind of muted purple. And so, yeah, and it wiped away the doily stenciling at the bottom as well. So voila, no more Dusty Concord. That was really surprising to me. I guess I was just in the flow and I wasn't thinking about the fact that I was not using a permanent ink. Thankfully, I do have that same color in this small cube of archival ink from Ranger. So I went ahead and put that stuff back on. I didn't put the doily design back on, but I did come back with the hearts and that mixed media looking like marks and stuff, whatever that's called. In the end, I do come back and color in those hearts. I put the stencil back and I use my black archival ink to make them black because they just were not going to tie the piece together. The color was too much of a dark purple, kind of a reddish purple almost. And here I'm just coming in because that rice paper was smaller than my canvas. I'm just coming in with my carbon black premium Decoart premium paint and just painting that edge. And then I will come in with my Soho pastel also and try to blend that in by using the pastel. And here is where I'm trying to figure out the placement of my sentiment, and I was completely lining it up incorrectly. So that was interesting. And I did decide I wanted to add a layer of that Dusty Concord Distress ink and emboss it again just for another layer. You can emboss with a Distress ink even though it's water soluble. You just can't, because you're heat setting it. You're basically sealing it with the embossing powder, which is basically plastic. And so I really liked how this turned out by giving it another layer of the Dusty Concord. And so here again, heat setting that. Apologize, I thought I had cut out some of that drying time, but anyway, you get to see the real thing. This is the real stuff, folks. This is art that is not perfection. This is art that is experience and exploration. So, and here is where I'm coming in with that black archival ink over those two hearts just to make them black. Because again, the purple was just not it was just not working for me. You'll see as I move through this that I do tweak a lot of things, and it ends up changing the whole project significantly from what I had in my mind. But in the end, I really loved the piece, and I was pleased with how it turned out, even though it took me way longer than it should have, and it was more chaotic than I would have liked. But and so here, because I'm thinking about that sentiment incorrectly, I placed that first piece, because it does, when they're a large sentiment, they come in pieces. And I placed it there, not thinking that the next two lines were going to drop down from there lower, but they did not. They were supposed to line up side by side. But I don't discover that until here in a quick moment. But you'll see. Everything is fixable as far as I'm concerned. So I appreciate the opportunity to persevere and follow through with a project, even though it's not going as planned. I really didn't want to mess up this design. I love the ballerina. Again, ballerina is something that's near and dear to my heart for a lot of personal reasons. So I really did not want to mess her up, even though I do have one more sheet of that rice paper because she was so beautiful. So here is where I had discovered that I was lining it up wrong. So it needs to say dance to the beat of your dreams rather than dance to the beat of something. I don't even know. It was just so misaligned. It would have been a tragedy if I had not caught that, which very possibly could happen. So, but anyway, that's where it ended up. I needed to move it down because it was going to be sitting side by side. And so I put it over her dress. That was the least conspicuous place for me to place that, that quote. And here I'm coming back in, just touching up the edges with my Soho black soft pastel. And here I'm coming back in with my Art Alchemy waxes. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing because I go back and forth with these waxes, trying to get the effect that I wanted. And so this is the vintage silk again that I used earlier. And I went over the sentiment again. I was glad that I went around the edges, as you're going to be able to see as I move up top there. That's the vintage silk. I like the vignette look that it created. And then so I kind of went with that as I was continuing to fuss around with this. The Mystic Turquoise was just non-essential at all. I ended up covering it up completely. I didn't like what it was doing to the color on top of the vintage silk. It was just kind of dull, and I didn't care for it. But as you'll see here in a moment, I do continue to kind of finesse this until I get the look that I was after. And then here I'm coming back in with the, I believe that this is the Mystic Turquoise again on the sentiment. But again, it was a non-essential piece because I end up covering it up. But again, I think it's important to share the parts of the process that don't work. And in here, I'm going ahead and coming in back in with my soft pastel because I really wanted that frame look. And so that's what you see me doing there. I promise it turns out beautiful in the end. And this is where it just kind of all came together. I came in with the electric violet, which again landed me right back to that bright purple that I started out with the ultramarine violet in the golden fluid acrylic that I started with. But you know, sometimes those rabbit trails happen and they do end up leading you back to what feels right and what just intuitively is pleasing to the eye. So I was really glad that it went this way. And then I'm attaching my butterfly. And that's pretty much it. I did come in after I was done filming and used the wax Peacock color, which you'll see in the final pictures. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and thank you for your patience as I stumble and teach you what it's like to make mistakes in mixed media. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.